stir us, Jesus. Just stir us, Lord. In your name, amen.
Amen. Man, so it's really fun to join you guys. I love what I'm seeing going on here too. We can relate because we just kind of went through a bit of a building transition campaign. I know the agony of kind of watching just everything take place, but I just love to see the transformation that's happened here. Man, you guys have like some prime real estate too, isn't it? It's such a perfect spot. Just even already the few stories that I'm hearing of just how you guys are serving your community and serving them well. I'm just fired up with what I'm seeing God do, just even here at Overflow. But yeah, greetings from Dove Westgate Church in Ephrata. We love being a part of the Dove family, and I know my wife Julia and I have connected just with Doug and Jen over the years, and some of the leadership training conferences and stuff like that, and seeing them out there in our area. But it's really fun being able to come over. I mean, it's not that far, right? But it's just amazing how sometimes we live in our little bubbles and our PA communities. But yeah, it's just it's funny too hearing Doug talk about even just the coffee. We've had some of those coffee controversies as well. Since when we kicked off our new cafe, and I know that the coffee was chosen, I don't know, about a year ago, what coffee they're going to use, and that created a firestorm of opinions, and everyone's like, who chose this coffee? And I remember coming in one Sunday, and one of the young adults was talking to me, and he's like, Wes, he's like, what is this stuff? I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, dude, he's like, it tastes like beef stew. I mean, yeah, I wasn't a big fan of the coffee, but I've never heard anyone equate coffee to soup. But he said, just drop some carrots in there and call it good. Now I don't want to touch this coffee ever again. But anyway, it's just funny to see the opinions that we have, right? But yeah, just be able to chug along and love each other, even if we like Dunkin' Donuts coffee or just Starbucks coffee, a little bit better. But also just thankful to you for your guys' flexibility. I know that, this has been a season of just so much change, right? A lot of changes just happened at the last minute, which has been the story of our lives throughout this last year. And but we lead a young adult small group at our home every Monday night, and so my wife was going to be sharing this last week, and God highlighted the character quality of flexibility. And so she began preparing for that, began to speak into that. And over that time, over this last week, my daughter fell out of a tree and broke her toe. I'm very thankful to God it was only just a broken toe. But she fell about 12 feet, and broke her toe pretty good. It was just like off to the side, kind of thing. But all better now. I was just, getting healed up. And then 2 days later, that my son ended up being supposedly exposed to someone in class that tested positive for COVID. So, come home. So one of the reasons why we didn't even come out here for the retreat. And so my wife came home after we found out we had a full game out of first grade. And I said, you realize all this is your fault. You would not have spoken on flexibility. If you just pick endurance or pick, obedience or some other character quality, attentiveness. But of course, you had to pick that one. And then God was like, okay, let's highlight this one a little bit more. So, daughter falls out of the tree, son comes home from school, be flexible, Wes. I'm totally kidding on that. But isn't it amazing, though, too? We go on these journeys, right? And then, man, God just begins to highlight what needs to get adjusted, fixed, changed. And so I'm thankful for that because that to me is just the power of the Holy Spirit as He shines a light into our life and said, hey, the darkness is in that closet, and we're shining light in the sucker, and it's going to get dealt with. But anyway, I'm married to Juliana. We've been married for 15 years. We have an 11-year-old Savannah and a 7-year-old Gabriel, and they are a blast. We love just what God's doing in our family, just to see, just how God's even stirred up our children, just full of love for Him. And I wish that they could be here with me today. You enjoy hanging out with them, especially little Gabe. He's a fireball of energy. But I do really feel like I have a relevant word for you guys, and as I was even praying over the last few months, just kind of digging into what God wanted to just speak through me, and even just what He's been working in my own heart too over the last few months. I was pretty fired up about coming to this retreat. Just it had everything mapped out, and so I'm still going to kind of just dig into a little bit of what I was going to share just into the retreat, just adjusting it a little bit, just considering the time that we have this morning. But I do believe it's a relevant word for every one of us, and it's for a couple reasons. But it's something we need to be reminded of. We're told in Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun. We like to think so often, like, this is the first time this has ever happened to me or to anyone in the world. You know, my context, I mean, this is a first. And the sky is falling. And Solomon makes it clear, no, these cycles continue. And yes, I realize that our context maybe is a little different because we have technology, so we can kind of see what's happening halfway around the world at the same time what's happening to us right now. However, for thousands of years, many generations of people have declared, this is the end. The sky is falling. And it might feel somewhat unprecedented even right now, but the whole earth has been groaning for thousands of years for the return of Jesus Christ. The whole earth has been groaning for thousands of years for him to make everything new, and he is making things new gradually. Just because we're going through a very painful experience right now does not mean that it is only we're the first ones this has ever happened to. Are you guys following me here?
Yes.
Because sometimes we can fall into this trap of, just self-pity. Just wallow in just like, woe is me, kind of that whole Eeyore mentality. And that is not God's heart for his people. But at the same time, there are certain things that we need to grapple with, and it's okay to respond, I think, accordingly. And that's what I want to get into a little bit here. So I want to look at 1 Samuel chapter 30, okay? 1 Samuel chapter 30, verses 1 through 6. Again, at the retreat, we probably would have broken down the entire chapter. There's a lot of just good stuff here. So I'm just going to read the first verse, and I'll dig into the other verses. But it says, in 1 Samuel chapter 30, verse 1, it says, 3 days later, when David and his men arrived home at their town of Ziklag, they found that the Amalekites had made a raid into the Negev and Ziklag. They crushed Ziklag and burned it to the ground. So I'm not sure if any of you know your Old Testament history very well. This is kind of a little bit of a fringe story in a sense. And even the book of Samuel is not something we always go through. But if you have not gone to the book of Samuel, I would highly recommend you spend some time digging through there just to see David, his journey, his response, and just kind of how to handle difficult times, because that seemed to be a bit of a theme through David's life. But Ziklag was, so some of you probably remember this too, but we're told in 1 Samuel that God had appointed a king for Israel, and that first king of Israel's name was King Saul. And so God set him up to do many choice decisions he made. God said, you know what, this king is going to be removed from you, and I'm going to put somebody else in place, and it's going to be David, a man after my own heart. So, what it means to happen, though, is that King Saul goes off the deep end, and he tries to make it his mission to kill the anointed next king of Israel. Even so Saul's still king, David's up and coming king, but Saul's like, you know what, this ain't going to happen, and I'm going to try to take you out. So, what happens is, David starts just taking off, hiding here and there, doing whatever he can. And a couple times, even Saul's like, you know what, I have sinned against God, I'm not going to do this anymore. But then that jealousy creeps in again, that spirit of jealousy, and he can't help himself, and he wants to take out David's life. So David was very tired of running, and he had accumulated quite a band of men, and he had gone to the Philistines and said, listen, is there anywhere that we can live in your region? Where we can just stop hiding, we can stop running, and we can just kind of park it here. So the Philistines said, okay, you know what, we'll hook you up, and we're going to give you a town. They literally gave them a town, and it was called Ziklag. So David and his 600 mighty men and all of their families are parking it. They lived there for a year and a half, right there in Ziklag. And if you can picture kind of that Middle East, Israel region, Ziklag was located in what's called the Negev, but you can still go see it. Has anyone in here been to Israel before? I've never been myself. Have you been there? Okay, awesome. Did you ever go to the Negev? Okay, so it's the southern region of Israel, right? It's kind of a little bit more barren, kind of off a little bit of the wilderness, but it's still a place you can go check out. There's still some historical stuff you can see even to this day. It's a massive countryside region that was to be south of Jerusalem. So David, again, the 600 warriors, their families, their wives, kids, they sunk their roots down, and it became their home base. So, David and his men go to do some raiding, some negotiating, some different things with the Philistines, and they come home to this. So again, let's look at it again. 1 Samuel chapter 30, verses 1 through 6. 3 days later, after just kind of hanging out, doing some different things with his mighty men, when David and his men arrived home at their town of Ziklag, they found that the Amalekites had been arrayed into the Negev and Ziklag. They had crushed Ziklag and burned it to the ground. They had carried off the women and children and everyone else, but without killing anyone. When David and his men saw the ruins and realized what had happened to their families, they wept until they could weep no more. David's 2 wives, Ahinoam from Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal from Carmel, were among those captured. David was now in great danger because all his men were very bitter about losing their sons and daughters, and they began to talk of stoning David. But David found strength in the Lord his God. Kind of a tragic situation, right? So picture this. Even in your own context, picture maybe, you head off to, in our context, maybe just you and your friends head off to just maybe a little weekend getaway, maybe a cabin in the woods, a little vacation, or maybe even a business trip. You come back to your house, and your house is smoldering in ruins. Your spouse is gone. Your kids are gone. They even took your belongings. Your dog's gone. They probably killed your cat. Everything is completely destroyed. A lot of loss going on, right? How would you feel? Well, feelings, how would you feel? You would be completely devastated, wouldn't you? In the same way, too, how many of us have encountered some kind of loss this year? How many of us have encountered some kind of loss? I would say probably every single one of us in this room, in some way, shape, or form, have encountered something. Even if, the only thing you've lost this week, this year has been not having a retreat this year. That's still loss, okay? I find it fascinating in the midst of this loss to see what David and these 600 warriors did. The first thing that they did, how they responded to this. Did you catch it? It says, they wept until they could weep no more. It is okay to grieve what's been lost. A lot of times, even in our own culture, we want to I just gotta pick up my chin and just move forward. Or God's with me. There's no reason to be downhearted over this. It's okay to mourn. It's okay to cry. Even I'd say this, men in the room. Real men cry. Okay? It's okay to let your guard down. You have 600 warriors. Probably all of these dudes are much bigger, stronger. Just some bad, tough dudes, bigger than I can even imagine, and they're all mourning and crying their eyes out, weeping till they can weep no more. Has that ever been have you even let yourself do that? Do you even know how to do that? We need to learn this. We as believers too, we need to understand this. We need to cultivate and develop this theology of suffering. There are going to be some firestorms. There are going to be some intense times that we walk through. And one of the first things that we need to understand is that it's okay to lament, to cry out, to mourn what's been lost. And not just pretend like nothing has even happened and we just move on. I know that for me, in our family, and that might sound so trivial, especially those of you in this room that may have actually gone through something even more intense. But when I look back over this year, there's one thing that I'd say that I just remember as a dad, just grieving so much as when everything was starting to take place kind of in March, to see our kids getting pulled out of school. And that might sound really dumb, but here's the thing. A couple years ago, we were homeschooling, we began to seek the Lord, so okay, God, what's next here? God clearly told us to not homeschool any longer and to intentionally put our kids in the Effort School District and to begin to just build bridges, make connections with teachers, principals, administrators, classmates, families in our neighborhood, all those different things. And so we saw God, back in fall 2019, begin to do some awesome things And so we're going through month after month after month. I was getting more embedded in the school, and then all of a sudden, boom! Everyone home. And my daughter missed out on some awesome experiences as a 5th grader. And I just remember my heart just was broken over that because I was seeing some incredible people that got a place in my kids' lives, and now everything changed. And that's the challenge too, isn't it? Because I know that God told our family to do that. And maybe even in your context too, you know that God told you to go this certain route. You know that the thing that you're walking in obedience to, that you see God's favor, and all of a sudden things come to a grinding halt. That's heavy stuff, isn't it? Maybe it's like the loss of a loved one as well. That's heavy stuff. What seems like an untimely death. You know, see how even just this virus has affected almost every aspect of our lives. It is creating loss. And it is okay to mourn what's been lost. It's okay to cry until you can cry no more. And it doesn't make you a sissy. It doesn't make you a wimp. It doesn't mean that you're checked out. But you're recognizing again that all of creation is groaning for the Lord to make all things new. And here's a perfect example of the suffering that our world continues to go through until His kingdom is completely here. Right?
Yes.
So do we know how to do that? But here's where it gets dicey, okay? With our emotions anyway. Here's where it can get a little interesting. Because we can't stay in that place of mourning. And that's the other challenge of this. Is yes, we need to be able to mourn. We should be recognizing what's been lost. But at the same time, we can't stay there. We can't stay there. And what's fascinating to me is, because I can relate to this, right? How the men responded to this. So it says in verse 6, it says, David was now in great danger because all his men were very bitter about losing their sons and daughters. No duh. And they began to talk of stoning him. And isn't that typically our next response? Who can I blame? So even right now, we're going through this whole election, right? You may go through some sort of loss. Maybe your candidate didn't win, and you're just feeling great. Who can I blame? Whose fault is this? And so maybe you picked yourself up, and you're not mourning anymore, but now you're ticked off. Whose fault is it? David's fault. David, you're the one who's been leading us this whole time. Why in the world were we hanging out with the Philistines for the last 3 days? We wanted to go check in on our families. Or, David, how could you? Why are you making so many enemies around us? I'm done with this. Our family is ruined. I may not ever see my wife or kids again. Who knows what's happening? I want you dead. Play the blame game. How many can relate to that? Even in the smallest context, right? We always want to figure out whose fault is it. So the mighty men began to place blame, but David did something else, didn't he? David responded completely differently. And he did something that does not come naturally to us at all. It says there at the second part of verse 6, but David found strength in the Lord his God. Other versions might even say, David encouraged himself in the Lord his God. As we're going through, different loss in our lives, as we hopefully are not playing the blame game, can we learn how to encourage ourselves in the Lord just like David did? So even in the midst of what can be intense loss, even in the midst of suffering, even in the midst of just challenges that can be all around us, or very much in our own personal space, do we know how to encourage ourselves in the Lord? And one of the things I wanted to break down even over the retreat was just, what that looks like. And so just real quick, I just want to summarize that just a little bit. Because one of the things that I just love how this is laid out in Revelation, we're told that they overcame him, talking about the wicked one. They overcame Satan by the blood of the Lamb, by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto death. That to me is knowing how to encourage yourself in the Lord. If we're trying to find a little bit of and I use this word very loosely, okay? If we're trying to find a bit of a formula, they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb, the word of their testimony, and they love not their lives unto death. What does that mean? That means, number one, you recognize who you are. if you're a follower of Jesus, you are protected, you are covered, and you should always have the end in mind. You should always have eternity in mind. Because you're covered by the blood of Jesus Christ. A word of their testimony. Are you remembering? And this is where I think that David knew how to do this. He encouraged himself in the Lord his God. Because you look at the Psalms, you know David's stream of thought. You know how he was so purposeful. He was so intentional about remembering what God's done. You, each one of us in this room, you're even in this building for a reason. How has God moved in your life? How is he directing your steps? What is the testimony that you have? How has God led you to where you're at right now? And again, maybe when you're in the middle of the pain, sometimes it's not so easy to see it, is it? But that's why it's so critical that number one, if you're writing things down or writing down those stories, or you're just sharing your heart with a brother or sister in Christ because they're able to remind you, hey, listen, calm down, it's okay. Remember that one time? You've seen God get you through stuff in the past, and he will do it again. Amen. That's the word of our testimony, isn't it? Yes. There's power in that. I believe in it so much. That's why I hope you guys do this. I know in Doug's heart, I'm sure that some degree you guys do, but finding ways to keep those testimonies alive. Make sure that if the word's getting out there, hey, here's an awesome story of how God's moved in this person's life, in this person's context. Making sure that it gets documented if we can even do that stuff, and then revisiting it. That is how the enemy backs off, because we're able to stand on solid ground. And then the last thing, they love not the lies of the death. We've been reminded of that this year, though, haven't we? How much does fear want to creep in? Oh, my word, this is about, this is the news kind of, oh, there's people dying over in Asia. Oh, it's going through Europe. Oh, it's here in the United States. Oh, we need to wear a mask. Or, oh, all these different opinions of these flying around. And we've seen division all around because nothing divides like fear. Right? If fear creeps in, you start pulling apart. But if you don't love your life to death, if you're not so consumed with just this life, and you again recognize the end game, recognize what we've been created for eternity, then you're not going to get quite as worked up over some of this stuff. You're going to be unoffendable. You're going to be unshakable. And while the rest of the world's running around you like the chicken with their head cut off, does that happen? You are going to be steadfast, unmovable. Are you guys with me here?
Yes.
You follow what I'm saying? That to me that's how you encourage yourself in the Lord. There's so many other ways you can get into this. So I'm not trying to say this is the only way, but just real fast, quick little snippet. This is how we can do that by recognizing the blood of the Lamb, the word of our testimony, and then we don't hold our lives to death. And those are the Psalms, and you'll also see a whole wide variety. Even just you read Psalm 39 earlier too. We just like those are great examples of how we can encourage ourselves in the Lord. But here's something else we need to realize, guys. And we as Americans can struggle with this. But it's enough to know that God knows. It is enough to know that God knows.
Amen.
Do you understand the implications of that?
Yes.
Not everyone around you has to understand what you're going through. Not everyone around you, you might feel completely unjustly accused, completely betrayed. Take it up with your Creator. That's exactly what David did. He just lost his entire family. All his belongings are in smoldering ruins. And here's 600 men that want to take him out. And it's enough to know that just God is completely aware of his situation and take it up with him. Encourage yourself in the Lord, your God. Sometimes we don't know. Sometimes we don't know that Jesus is all we need until Jesus is all we have.
Amen.
So we truck along and say, yes, we come to church on Sunday, or we gather in our life groups and we do these different things. But until the rubber meets the road, sometimes you don't realize you need this stuff. Until Jesus is sometimes the only thing that's left. Yep. And right here for David, this is the only thing that's left, is just this. And how did he respond? By remembering who God is, remembering that he's not been forgotten, he hasn't been forsaken. David could have done a variety of things, couldn't he? After everything was burned down. Think about it. It would have been so easy to be depressed, to walk in despair, to cut and run. Again, just thinking these guys are going to kill me now. Which, if he would have cut and run, I mean, who knows? I'm not trying to get into the whole story, but let's just say it is a happy ending. But the happy ending probably wouldn't have happened had he just like said, you know what, I'm out of here. He could have given in to rant